Greetings, everyone. Thanks for joining me. What's going on in Britain? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a lot of hubbub going on and chaos and uprisings and protests and Starmer and all sorts of things. And I don't know a whole lot about it. But I am bringing someone on who does know a lot about it. And before I introduce her, let me just explain why I think this is important. Because the context, of course, if you don't know, is Britain is having all sorts of problems. And a lot of it, according to a lot of the native Brits, has to do with the mass Muslim migration and a sort of Islamification of society. That is the complaint. And of course, if you listen to the official channels, the government, well, they're all a bunch of hooligans and racists and Islamophobes, and everything is fine. And they're just troublemakers. So where's the truth at? But why I really think this is important and why we're talking about it today is because I also sense that this is symbolic of and bodes of greater events, either better or worse events. So in a way, I think England and Britain in general is sort of a paradigm for the West of what can happen and where it can lead to. In other words, I think Britain is at a crossroads right now. And anyway, without any further ado, let me bring on Emma Trimble, a true Brit who has much to say on this topic, who has been there on the ground, is a journalist, and she's going to fill in all the gaps for us to try to make sense of it. So without further ado, here's Emma Trimble. How you doing, Emma? Thanks for joining
me. Raymond. Thank you for calling me true Brit. I like that.
Well, okay, so what is the deal? Okay, and before you proceed, I think by way of background, if you can just give us a little bit of context for people who don't know all that's going on above and beyond what I just said. I gave a very general summary about the Muslim migrants, but I think, of course, that's sort of just superficial. It is, I think, the heart of it, but there's a lot of other aspects involved. But before we talk about the big events that sort of just happened, and the two that I think or I sense are important and not being spoken enough about are this sort of, open sort of alliance between the left, the Greens, the Muslims, and their attempt to manipulate the votes in a very open, frank way. And also this mass rally that just took place, I think last Saturday. And I know you're closely acquainted with both those things and more. But before we get to them, can you succinctly, if I'm just some guy in America who doesn't know much about what's going on in Britain, just kind of summarize what's at the heart of what's going on?
Yeah, it's difficult to know how far back to go. And mass migration is obviously, like you mentioned, it's the big issue. Even just since the pandemic, we had something that has been described as the Boris wave. So we saw 4 million migrants come in under Boris Johnson alone. I think a good place to start would be 2016. So that's obviously you guys had Trump and we had Brexit, and that was a real cry for help by British people who were trying to say to the ruling establishment that they have to listen to the voice of the electorate, because time and time again, the British public voted for less migration. They didn't get it. Migration has gone up and up and up since the late 90s. It really is astronomical. I mean, in the last 6 years, I think, 8 years, I think, alone, or since 2018. We've seen 200,000 people come illegally across the channel alone in small boats. And people are really starting to use the language of invasion, of even of settler colonialism, because the migration is so completely out of control. And so in 2016, there was this attempt to try and get the ruling parties to listen. But the problem is that neither Labour nor the Conservatives seem to have been able to actually respond to what the British public want. And now what we're seeing 10 years on, after Brexit has been frustrated through all of that time and migration has continued to go up and up and up exponentially, what we're seeing now is that the British people have reached such a sort of height of frustration that the two main parties, Labour and the Conservatives, in their own way are starting to collapse. So at the last general election, the Conservatives were wiped out. They're really struggling to pull themselves back from the brink. And the Reform Party, led by Nigel Farage, is stepping into the void left by the Conservative Party and is more aligned with what the majority of particularly white British people, but not solely white British people, want, especially in terms of migration. And then on the other side, you have the Labour Party, which is also collapsing. And we're seeing a rise of not only far left politics in the form of the Green Party, but also this horrific Islamo-communist alliance between organized elements in the Muslim community and independent sectarian candidates and the very far left Green Party.
Okay. Thank you for that. So one of my questions as you're speaking, and I know this is true, of course, in Britain. It's true all over in the Western countries. It's true in America, what I'm about to say, but it strikes me that it's especially true in Britain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or elaborate. But it seems to me like what I'm hearing is basically the people are saying something and they're seeing something with their own eyes, which is their society transforming overnight or over decades. But rapidly transforming into something it's not. Into something they don't want, into something alien. And the government is basically saying, don't believe your eyes, shut up, get in line. Because that's what it sounds like, which is not a tenable situation eventually. I mean, that sort of thing has a way of boiling over. So is that sort of what it is? It just seems to me like the government and the Starmer and the things they say, because I've seen videos of him, the way he talks. And it just seems like the easy thing to say is he's disconnected, but that's to give him a pass. I'm done doing that, of saying politicians are just dumb. I actually think they know exactly what they're doing, at least most of them. But it strikes me as really strange when you have a government that is just, all the people, and you're going to elaborate about what happened during this recent protest and other protests, and how everyone is just sick of it. And the government's kind of like, no, nothing's wrong. Everything's fine. They're just racists. I mean, is that it in a nutshell?
Yeah, I mean, it's seriously Orwellian. It is don't believe your eyes and ears. And I think it's gone on for so long now that people just don't care anymore. The accusations don't stick. And it's really, I mean, it with respect to this most recent rally that happened in London. So there were two rallies on the same day. There was one Nakba march, effectively, I don't know if commemorating is the right word, but the day when the Muslim countries didn't manage to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and this is what they were having their rally for. And it was the kind of usual leftist stand up to racism types alongside your kind of anti-racist types, some Antifa presence there, it seemed. There was a video circulating online that looked like the mounted police were trying to stop the Antifa protesters from being able to get into the march that was happening at exactly the same time, a couple of streets away in Whitehall. And at the same time, you had this march that was being organised by Tommy Robinson. And the pro-Palestine marches have been happening on a very regular basis for years now, literally years. And you see people at these marches, they'll be shouting things like Kaibar, Kaibar, Ya Yahud, referring to the genocide of the massacre of Jews in Kaibar. And actually, there was someone holding one of those posters at this most recent rally. And they'll be chanting things like "Globalize the Intifada." On occasions, there were people who were waving ISIS flags. You see, I mean, I saw at the one that I went to over the weekend, people wearing the Al-Qassam Brigade's inverted red triangle, which is associated with Hamas. And they were actually selling these T-shirts there. And this is a fully policed thing. So there was an occasion that actually has become very symbolic, I think, for a lot of people. It gets mentioned all the time, which is that at one point the police were commenting on complaints about this guy who was chanting jihad, jihad in front of a banner that actually had the word Muslim armies on it. And the Metropolitan Police said there are multiple ways of interpreting the word jihad. As if the context would not imply that they didn't mean the peaceful version. And it was also, I think, if I remember rightly, it was the banner was a Hitsput Tahrir banner, which is from an organization that now has since been banned. But this shows how basically the police have not been policing these marches. And we've seen attacks on Jewish people and Jewish communities going up through the roof as well. Really serious attacks, attempts to actually murder Jews in synagogues, setting fire to the community's ambulances, firebombing, that kind of thing. The police didn't do anything about that. The government didn't really take it seriously at all. And then simultaneously, you have this Tommy Robinson Unite the Kingdom rally, which anybody who was there on the ground would have seen isn't some white supremacist gathering. There were people there from all sorts of different racial backgrounds, some of the speakers from different racial backgrounds. A lot of just normal people who were very frustrated came on these marches. I mean, it's an absolutely huge march, probably over 100,000 people. Certainly the first one was over 100,000 people, although I'm not very good at guessing these things, and the mainstream media isn't necessarily the most reliable source. But the government and Keir Starmer was totally hysterical when it came to this march, and he banned a bunch of speakers from entering the country, which just, again, it shows the double standard. There have been a lot of talk here of complaints about two-tier policing, and this just plays into the idea that the government are not exactly being even-handed between groups here. When you see the way that they policed the Palestine hate marches, and then they're so
if I can just cut you off, because before you proceed, and we have a lot to unpack about what happened, but I want to talk about this two-tier thing real quick, because you've given several examples, and basically what you're saying, so everyone understands, is that basically a Muslim can hold an ISIS flag and engage and make chants that are obviously about decapitation and murder and terrorism. And, for whatever reason, the authorities, the police, the government, kind of like, it's okay, just ignore him. But if a Brit waves a St. George flag, it's a problem. And, or he just says something that's considered patriotic, then they clamp down on that. So considering that both of them, from an objective point of view, let's say, if I'm just being objective, I'm not British, I'm not siding with anyone, both can be inflammatory, both can be whatever. Why is it that there is this sort of feeling, and this I think is genuine. So, on the one hand, I was saying that I do believe there's some manipulation going on the very top, but I do believe the rank and file, lots of average Brits, for example, have been so conditioned to sort of think like that's okay when a Muslim does that. Okay, like we can just turn a blind eye. And I think, I guess the logic is because there's this conviction that he's suffering from grievances, so he has to vent. But if a Brit does anything remotely like that, then he's a threat. He needs to be arrested. It's hate. It's evil. So ultimately, it's a philosophical question I'm asking you. We know it's a two-tier system, but I'm trying to see if you can penetrate into the logic of not why. I mean, we know it's unjust, and there are people who know it's unjust, and they're intentionally doing that. But I'm talking about, I think, a lot of people who also, just for whatever reason, when a Muslim, whatever they say, however horrific it is, it's in their mind, it's kind of like, yeah, it's okay. Just, it's okay. He's not the bad guy. But when a white person says or does anything, oh my God, it's the end of the world. What is that?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there psychologically, I think. Part of it, I think, is that maybe Americans won't understand this, but Britain still has a sort of sense of class. And if someone says something conservative in the wrong accent, if somebody says something conservative in a working class accent, then
that's
I
racist.
think there's a tendency for the authorities and for the government and for the metropolitan elite in general to sort of be sniffy towards them and look down on them and assume that therefore they must be far right. Even though if somebody with a much more elite accent were to say the same thing, they probably wouldn't get as much flack and as much disdain for it. I think.
So wait, that's interesting. So what you're saying is it's not so the things that the far right say, it's not necessarily what they say, it's the class of the person saying it.
Yeah, I think some of the heavy-handedness towards and also some of the really quite venomous attitude that you see from certain people towards the white worker. We saw this actually over Brexit, that they're all just these stupid, knuckle-dragging troglodytes. They voted for Brexit because they're dumb and they're stupid and they're evil. and they're bad people.
Hey, come on. All right.
And I think you see that. I mean, we did see this actually with so in the local elections, and we'll get to all of this. There's so much to discuss, so I don't want to take us off down a tangent too early.
Yeah.
But and I wish I had sent you the tweet so that we could somehow bring it up for people to see. But a Muslim journalist tweeted an image of reform voters queuing outside of the polling station, and it was this image of these kind of AI generated image of these, fat, scruffy, lazy, slovenly creatures, all like the sorts of people that you might think are on benefits or whatever it is. It was a really malicious caricature of people who were queuing up to go and vote reform. And you see this across the board actually in the UK. I mean, there was a Labour Party MP who very famously tweeted, her name's Emily Thornberry, she very famously tweeted an image of a house with a white van and the St. George's flag hanging out of the window in this kind of disdainful way, because the white van is associated with, the working class white tradesman, basically. And it's almost a cultural problem, I think, of the establishment. It's one of the reasons why I think the parties have not been able to maintain any kind of contact with the reality of white working class Brits. The Labour Party, who traditionally the white working class Brits would have been their kind of constituency, they have long since abandoned those people and turned their attentions onto migrant communities, anything to do with race, religion, and whatnot. So those people have really been abandoned. And then also on top of that,
before you move on, because why are they abandoning them and choosing the Muslim migrant? Is it for cynical, pragmatic reasons to get votes? Because I know we're going to go there at one point. Or is it, again, some sort of philosophical undermining? I have to always dislike my own and side with the other to show how tolerant and progressive and enlightened I am. Why is that happening? Because most cultures, if you look around the world, what's happening in Britain in particular and in the West in general, it just doesn't happen in other countries. It doesn't matter if they're black, brown, yellow, whatever. The government serves the people and it wants the people to be patriotic, but you come to somewhere like Britain and we hate our own people and we're trying to help others. What is that? I'm just trying to, how do you understand? I think it's become so taken for granted that we just assume that's the way it is. But for me, it's very interesting to try to get to the heart and bottom of it. Why is it like that?
Yeah, I think
an anomaly.
I think it's psychological, it's political, and it's philosophical. So I think that the psychological aspect of it, I think, is it's a bit like the sort of suicidal empathy that Gad Saad talks about. I think the psychological aspect is tied into a lot of different things. So, I mean, maybe we can come back to that. The philosophical side of things, I think, maybe I should say political first. The political side of it is, I think that there are certain parts of the left that decided effectively that the white working class were too conservative to give them their revolution, and that actually they may be more likely to foment the kind of radical change that they want from within migrant communities. And I think
don't they understand that these radicals are extreme liberals, and these Muslim migrant communities in general, are anti-liberal, anti-gay, anti all of their agendas? Like, do they not get that? Because it's really weird. If anything, I mean, I always explain it as the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so the issue is that these leftists just really hate the sort of, like Christian, traditional, conservative civilization. So they will side with anyone, even their, the antithetical ideology of their own, something like Islam, just because they hate the other one. That's my interpretation. But I don't know. Do you have another, do they not get it? Why are they siding with a group that, once they are in power, will be way less, will make the British conservatives look like, Boy Scouts?
Well, I mean, maybe we can get back to why it is that the Muslims do vote for for parties that radically disagree with them on really fundamental issues, like, you know, they're voting for parties that are extremely socially liberal in the sense that they are in favor of all of the LGBT stuff.
And when we both know, and we're going to go there, we both know they're not, so that they're exploiting the system until they have, you know, they're. I don't know if you know about this. This what happened in it was in Hamtramck in Michigan or Minnesota, I think, and it's the city council. Anyway, it's a town that was originally, I think, Polish. Anyway, and it's now the city council has now more than half Muslim majority. Okay. And before that, the left was, you know, completely pushing for Muslim migration, helping them, doing everything to the point that they became the majority. And right when it became a Muslim majority city council, the first thing they did is cancel all gay pride stuff. And the rest, and all the leftists who had helped them were upset, felt betrayed. How could you do this? So my point is, I think this is coming on a grand scale to all those leftist parties that you're talking about. And what shocks me is that they don't even know that, because the way you talk, it sounds like they just don't get that, which is, you know, amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm gonna jump the gun and read a quote, and we can maybe come back later if you want to. But there's a guy here in the UK, he's an imam who's very controversial and has been he's been on the scene for quite a long time.
A controversial imam in Britain. I never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, it was on a personal note, it was seeing his preaching when I was a student that actually got me into this stuff, like more than 10 years ago. So this guy he's been involved in all of the and we'll get into it a bit later, and the sort of like organizations that are helping to, and individuals who are helping to kind of coordinate the Muslim vote, but he's been part of that too. And in relation to the recent Gorton and Denton by-election, where you did see a lot of sectarian campaigning, we can come back to all that. We saw a lot of sectarian campaigning from the Green Party towards the Muslim community, and they campaigned in other languages like Urdu, and it was a very sectarian campaign. And people have been asking, well, why is it that this very this very socially conservative community would be able to turn a blind eye to all of this stuff, like Zach Polanski, the leader of the Green Party, sort of gyrating on stage with a guy who's kind of like dressed in fishnets, and it was all very fruity. And Haitham al-Haddad, this imam, gives a kind of explanation as to why it is that why they would vote for him, when he wrote explicitly about the Gorton and Denton by-election. And he said, quote, "We should remember, for example, that Allah allowed the Muslim to utter words of kufr, unbelief, if his life is under a real threat, saying, 'Whosoever disbelieves in Allah after believing, except he who is forced while his heart remains in his belief, but he who willingly opens his chest for disbelief shall receive the anger of Allah, and for such awaits a mighty punishment.'" So basically, it sounds as if it's kind of like taqiyya. It's saying, maybe you can tell me whether that quote actually is the quote that relates to taqiyya, but he's basically saying, because of the situation in Gaza, because Muslims' lives are at risk, and maybe with some of the fear mongering in the Muslim community, that, so, you know, there are some people who are trying to kind of fan these flames of, you know, the horrible, intolerant Brits are going to try and do something horrible to the Muslim community. That he's basically saying it's acceptable for Muslims to vote for the Greens strategically, because those are the ones who are going to allow the community to basically have more of their rights to live as they want to live. And that's justified, that they're not compromising themselves in any way by doing that. So I think that's the answer to the question that everyone's been asking, which is why is it that these communities would vote for the Greens when they're so progressive on, say, like gay rights and whatnot.
It's amazing that, you know, they say this, but I mean, I know that as well. They say this publicly and openly, and that quote you just read is exactly, you know, we can call it. I mean, the verse he cited is the Taqiyya verse, one of them. And you know, for whoever doesn't understand what Taqiyya is, it's basically an Islamic doctrine about that when you're weak and circumstances are not favorable for you to go on the offensive and demand what Islam demands, yeah, then you can play the game and you can side with whoever. You can even say you're not a Muslim. You can condemn Islam. You can curse Muhammad. You can get baptized. You can go to church. Okay, you can take communion. You can do all those things, and they've done it historically. There's ample precedence of it. As long as A, your heart is still with Islam, and B, what you're doing, this deception, this ruse, is all one way or the other going to help Islam in the end. And of course, so that's exactly, and what you just read to me is so common because I hear this all the time from Muslim leaders, always constantly saying, hey, we need to play the patient game. And then they cite Quran verses and they cite examples from the life of Muhammad because he himself did this when he was weak. Because Muhammad's life, he starts off weak, outnumbered in Mecca. And he has a whole different message. It's more tolerant, it's more inclusive, it's less bellicose. And that once he
Exactly.
the
I love it.
yeah, and then once he does the hijrah and goes to Yathrib, which becomes Medina, and he becomes essentially a warlord, and he gets all these followers and recruits. Then the message gradually starts changing, and it becomes less tolerant, more offensive warfare, and then it culminates with usually what's known as Surah Al-Tawbah, chapter 9 or Surah 9 of the Quran, which is by far the most militant and uncompromising surah in the entire Quran. This is the one where it's just like kill everyone, subjugate everyone. And so to the scholars from the very beginning, what it means is this evolution means that we as Muslims have to follow the pattern of Muhammad, which is if we're weak, outnumbered, then we play the game. Whatever they want, we go along with it. But in as much as we get stronger, then we start pushing back until we are in charge. And then we just go full Sharia mode, essentially. Okay. So I've heard countless clerics talk about this and say this. And so of course, what you just described is exactly what's happening, in Britain. And I'll end it with just the final anecdote that I've said before, so people may have heard this. You'll get a kick out of this. So I just explained to you how the Quran is known. Like there's two versions. The Mecca version is the older and more tolerant, okay? And then the Medina is the newer and more violent. And so because it's newer, it's said to cancel the older teachings of tolerance. But the final gist of it for Muslims is, no, they're both okay. The ideal one is Medina, the assertive, offensive warfare. But if we find ourselves in a position where we're weak, then we can take on the Meccan way. Mm-hmm. So the anecdote is a long time ago, like 15, maybe more years, 17 years ago. I was working at the Library of Congress, and there was a lot of Muslims, and there was a large Somali population. And I dealt with a lot of them. They spoke Arabic, and one of them was like a learned sheikh, a cleric. But he was like, like silver tongued devil, and he would say all the good stuff. And one time we actually went to the cafeteria, kind of had lunch, and we started debating. And I basically told him what I'm telling you, which is because he was talking about no peace, and you have your religion, I have mine, etc. And I was like, well, what about the doctrine of abrogation? What about the Mecca verses? What about the Medina? Don't you know that? And I was kind of naive. I thought maybe he didn't, and because he was acting like he doesn't know what I'm talking about. And then finally, because I kept pushing him, he just threw his hands up in the air and said, well, what do you want? I'm living in Mecca, in America, in Washington, D.C. Yeah, I'm outnumbered. I can't do all that stuff. I can't do jihad. So, of course, I'm talking this way to you. That's basically what he said. So anyway, okay, so this is what it is. You get it. I get it. It's pretty obvious. We don't even have to elaborate and unpack doctrines. I mean, this is human nature. It's basically the ends justify the mean. So, what we as a group, as a collective, as a tribe want what we want in this foreign land. We want to take it over. So, yeah, we're going to lie. We're going to say whatever. We're going to play your little game. So what I don't get, though, is does the left not get that? Are they that stupid? That's what I don't get.
Maybe they are. That is the question: is why, if they are aware that this is a more socially conservative community, which they are, because one of the guys who's involved with these independent Muslim candidates, again, we can get onto that, but he organized the protests against the LGBTQ curriculum at schools, and that was a really difficult thing for the left because they don't want to be Islamophobic, but they also don't want to be transphobic, or so they got caught in the crossfire of their own intersectionality. And that's the issue, is that they do, I think, a lot of the more the sort of I don't like the phrase woke anymore because it's been sort of so overused, but like the more woke element of the left, who do believe in intersectionality, think that all downtrodden communities are in some way aligned in their interests, so that there is this kind of harmony to be had, this intersectional harmony, which is just a load of BS. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in full on your live stream.
It's basically the idea. It's basically the idea that the conservative, traditional Christian white man is the source of all evil. Everyone is good, including those whites who denounce it and are liberal and want to side and help with the Muslims, etc. Because we're all victims.
When I was saying earlier that I think there's a political, philosophical, and a psychological dimension to this, I think the psychological and the philosophical dimension are kind of linked in the left, in that some of this, I think, is a kind of neo-Orientalism, that they are blind actually to the realities of certain communities. It's what Majid Nawaz referred to as the bigotry of low expectations. It's also the doctrine of multiculturalism, which no matter how many times our politicians say multiculturalism has failed, that they have been saying that for 10 years now, more than 10 years now, we continue to have multiculturalism sort of saturating our policy thinking, saturating the narrative of our politics. And there is this sort of philosophical trap, basically, where the state can't, it can't, and I mean this in the really deep philosophical sense as well, that the state can't do anything about the regressive behavior, or even the harmful behavior, or even the anti-democratic or subversive behavior of certain individuals, groups, or communities, because that would be to inflict the harm of non-recognition on them. And that is the cardinal, to use Charles Taylor's phrase, that is the cardinal sin of multiculturalism, is to deny someone their authenticity. And so the state feels that it can't actually do anything about this. And so I think within some of the leftist communities, there is this kind of multiculturalist neo-Orientalism that has also been topped up by critical race theory and all of the hokum from the last 6 years. And I think they really are suicidally naive. I mean, all you have to do is look around the Islamo-socialism or Islamo-communism. Whenever these guys skip hand in hand, they always get it in the end. The leftists. They don't seem to learn from history on that front, that this is not some kind of permanent alliance that they are, going to be able to sustain for any amount of time. So I think part of it is, like I say, psychological. I think part of that is just anybody who also hates the West as much as we do, and hates us, particularly the white British, as much as the left do, that they, in their anti-Westernism and in their anti-Britishness, are natural allies, because they have solidarity in hating the same thing.
Can I ask you this question, which I know you don't know the answer because nobody probably does, but your best guess, if you took all of Britain, okay, what percent of people would conform to that thinking that you just of the white native Brits? What percent of all of them do you think, your gut feeling, and from what you've known and people that you see in the street, would conform to that sort of woke, insane, anti, that crazy kind of thinking? Because I think we all have this idea that there are a significant amount, maybe not a majority, but maybe not even half, but we think they're something. But sometimes I think they're like, they don't even really exist. They're just a figment of our imagination that's used in the media to make us think. And of course, some do exist, but sometimes I just feel like they're probably a tiny, tiny minority. And the majority of the people are going to be the sorts of people that we'll be talking about who were at that rally. Well, so what is your gut feeling about, if you can give a rough estimate?
I'm not good with numbers, so I don't think I can give a numerical estimate, but I think it's a very, very small number of people in terms of the national population. And that's borne out by it's borne out even by the local election results. Reform, absolutely cleaned up. And same with Brexit. I mean, not that Brexit is necessarily an indication, because that was so sort of pre-woke. I think at the height of Black Lives Matter, there were more people who were probably of that ilk, purely because there, I think, is always going to be a certain reasonably large section of the population that will be adjacent to whatever the dominant ideology is. And so they were woke adjacent when that was the way that the landscape laid in terms of costs and benefits of, same with COVID, do you want to go against the status quo or that or not? I think some people just are attracted to the one that maybe has the most prestige, maybe at the time is, clearly the winning ideology. Now that I think that that's become less clear over time as things are getting increasingly politically chaotic here, I think there are less people who are instinctively adjacent to the woke position. But I think it's primarily it's a doctrine of the middle class, liberal metropolitan elite, the kind of political class, the media class. I imagine it's probably very much the same in the US, but I imagine that we have proportionally speaking, I think probably we have a larger percentage of the population that has more common sense. It's just that they're ignored. I don't mean has more common sense than the American people. I mean relative to our own population. The American people have a lot of common sense. That's why you've got Donald Trump.
And I guess I agree with you. And I guess the point I'm sort of trying to reach in my own head to share it with you is that we're sort of bred to think that, okay, there's these leftists and, they have their rights and, we have to argue with them and vote against them. They vote against us, whatever. But they're a significant amount. Maybe they're 25%, maybe they're 35%, maybe they're 50, 70, I don't know. But if you come to realize that, you know what, maybe they're actually a socially engineered minority of like 5%. But of course, they're amplified in the media. So you think they're everywhere, but they're not, because whenever I talk to anybody, they're normal. Okay. And I think you have the same experience. So I guess it just seems to me that this is a manufactured idea to make us think that we have a real competitor. And therefore, we always have to be engaged in this warfare of ideas because they have their ideas and we have our own. But it seems like it's all just a scam to waste our time, because these people really don't exist. They're just a prop. I mean, again, there's a small core that exists, mostly the numbskulls who've been just socially engineered and just, like you said, the ones who are aligned with the party's message. Okay. They do exist, but they're such a tiny minority. And I think it's edifying for us to understand that, the fight isn't even against another group of people, Americans or Brits, who think differently. The fight's actually just against a small elite that's manufacturing this image, this idea that's not even real. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think also that the situation here in the UK is quite complex, because even though, so over the last 6 years, it's not that we've been distracted by the woke stuff, because even if it was a small number of people inflicting it on the majority of the population, it was still having a horrendously insidious effect on our institutions. I mean, we had the Sentencing Council here that decides the guidelines on how criminals are sentenced, basically creating a provision that would have effectively meant that people from ethnic and religious minorities would be getting less sentences than, that's a whole other thing. And there are other cases like this where, we know it was the case during the grooming gangs. We know it was the case during at least on 2 occasions. There have been cases where there have been mass casualty attacks. One was the Manchester Arena bombing, and the other was the Southport attack. Manchester Arena bombing was a terrorist attack that happened at an Ariana Grande concert and killed a load of kids. And someone didn't want to flag the fact that this guy, the guy who did this, looked suspicious. This guy, his name was Salman Abedi. They didn't want to flag the fact that he looked suspicious because they were worried about being accused of being racist. There was a similar thing with the Southport attacker who went and killed a load of little girls at a Taylor Swift dance class. And he ended up, his name was Axel Rudikabana, and one of his teachers, I think it was, had tried to raise concerns about him, and they'd been dismissed because of some concerns around racism. So we know this is a kind of systemic issue. So my point in mentioning this is saying that the anti-racism CRT stuff has had a dramatic effect, even if it's coming from a small minority of people who are in these institutions. We've seen our history being erased. We've seen our museums being purged of naughty things. Even the National Trust made a list of naughty houses. They included Winston Churchill on that list of bad people, and the great Edmund Burke, one of my personal favourite historical thinkers and philosophers. So my point is that even if it's a small number of people, it's had an enormous effect, and it was worth fighting back against, because they were trying to year zero our country. They were trying to get rid of everything that makes Britain distinctively Britain. We had this thing in London, that Sadiq Khan had this commission for diversity in the public realm, where he was trying to make statues and stuff like that more diverse, basically have less of Britain's past in the public square. All of the stuff around gender and all of the fights that have happened there, that was worth fighting back against. So it's not like it's a total distraction, but at the same time, while we've been doing all of this, mass migration has gone through the roof. We have no border with France. And an entire industry has formed, smuggling people into this country illegally. And now we've gotten to the point where it seems like every couple of days we hear of things like, someone's been killed, something terrible has happened to the Jewish community, an Afghan or a Syrian has raped someone. And it's just spiraling out of control. And the communities that are having all of this inflicted on them, particularly working class communities, because this is where these people get housed in, like, RAF bases and stuff. Those are the people who are bearing the brunt of these decisions that or the inaction of people who are living in the more affluent parts of society and affluent parts of the country. And people are really sick of it. So it was worth fighting. We had to fight it. But at the same time, this issue here, I actually think is a much bigger, significant historical issue, because, as Professor David Betts has pointed out, he's very concerned that he's an expert in civil wars. He's very concerned that we've laid the foundations for civil war in Britain, and that actually he sees the local election results not as a sign of a democratic release valve and this kind of great realignment in our politics actually succeeding, but as one more step along that road and as a bad sign. No,
that's thank you for that. You said a lot of very important and applicable stuff, but I a guy like me, that I still can't get beyond. Okay. And I guess because this is, to me, the source of the problem. I can't get beyond that. You have this two-tier system, which is basically, if you say the wrong word, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, the whole, a Muslim can wave an ISIS flag and boast about decapitating Khaybar Jews and all that, and that's okay. But, you had a St. George flag and you said something patriotic, you're a threat. So it's the same idea. This altercation that you mentioned, where a guy got stabbed by an Indian I saw. We'll clarify it, but and then the cops come and he's the one that has to be handcuffed because he said the bad word and he dies. Okay, and you gave many. I mean, the whole Rotherham, the grooming scandal. That's what it was too. Everyone knew it, including the police and the authorities, but it looks bad if we talk about it because it makes us look like racists or whatever, Islamophobes. So to me, this is really the heart of the issue. And this is why I say it's philosophical, or if you like, psychological problem, that people just have reached this point where there's a protected, privileged class, and they can say or do anything. And then there's you, and yeah, you need to know your place. And yeah, you're a second-class citizen in your own country. And if you dare just say a word, even if you get stabbed or you get raped, yeah, you're the bad guy. Um, for me, it's hard to understand and fathom this logic. And all, at the same time, it's not something that one should pass over quickly, kind of like, yeah, they're just stupid, because this really is the malady. This is the reason why all this is happening. And until that actually gets rectified, this mentality, these issues will never go away, even if you win an election. And you see this all the time. This is actually the history of the last 50 years, where you see conservatives win, and it's like you take one step forward, two steps back. Okay. So you look at America's history, oh, Ronald Reagan, the great era. And okay, well, look where we are now. And it kind of, yeah, there was good, but then it went back, and then it went a little good. And now we have Trump, and it's like another step forward. And then we're going to have like 10 steps back,
Yeah.
once he's gone. So this is why I pause here. And after you respond to this, we'll move on to weightier matters like the recent protests and the elections and the significance thereof.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think that one of the key examples of two-tier policing or two-tier justice was the case of Lucy Connolly, who was a mother who tweeted something about I wish I could remember the exact phrasing of her tweet, but she tweeted something about burning down migrant hotels for all I care, or whatever the phrase, whatever it was, however it was that she phrased it, and she did that at the height of the Southport riots. She very quickly took it down. She was given 2.5 years in prison for that tweet.
Has any Muslim been given time or arrested when they say things like burn Britain, racist, take them down, or nothing, right?
I mean, we've had people chanting globalize the intifada week after week after week, and nothing has happened. So I mean, she was given,
that's what I'm talking about, this phenomenon, where you have the same exact extremism, right? But one gets attacked with impunity and one is like, oh, it's okay.
But the thing is that, like this, like I say, she tweeted this during the Southport. There were riots after this guy Axel Ruder-Cabana went and killed kids in this Taylor Swift dance class, really young children, little girls, and people were out in the streets rioting, and the response of the government was really heavy-handed compared to anything else like it, and they expedited getting people convicted and that kind of thing. And it was very much the same kind of heavy-handedness that we saw from Keir Starmer ahead of this most recent rally in London, except I don't think it kicked off as it maybe he expected or perhaps wanted it to. I don't know. When I say wanted it to, I mean it might have been in his political interest if he seemed to be heavy-handed with these horrible far-right thugs. But the reality was they weren't horrible far-right thugs. I went there, I saw it myself, I spoke to people. They were lovely, lovely, salt of the earth, working class people who were there because they love their country and they just want to protect their culture. Normal people. And I say this with emotion because when I first walked out and I saw all these people sort of marching and Land of Hope and Glory was blaring out over the speaker, there were Christian flags everywhere. There were, one of the speakers prayed the Lord's Prayer. It's very actually kind of American. We don't really do that sort of thing here, these sorts of public displays of Christianity. But that's very much part of the national response to this is I think people are rediscovering their Christianity as part of their identity. There are some people who look down on that within the church, and they've got this kind of, there were some bishops who signed an open letter basically condemning the way that Christianity was being used politically. I think actually that they should be showing some proper leadership and rather than being so cynical about these people's turn to faith. But I feel very emotional just, talking to all these people. At one point, actually, I have to confess, I kind of teared up, emotionally incontinent millennial that I am. I got really emotional because these people are desperate. Like they see their countries being taken away from them, and all they want to do is pass their country on to their children. These are good people, and our Prime Minister turned on them and defamed them as a group, as being these sorts of, horrible far-right thugs. And it's not fair. And I think that, fairness really matters to the British. And the two, whether it's the two-tier policing or whatever, all of this stuff that we're talking about, even the fact that no one consented to mass migration and yet it's been inflicted on us anyway, the sense of unfairness runs so deep. And you see it in the local election results. People are just crying out, someone please save us from this fate that we never signed up to.
Wow. All right. I'm going to want you actually to elaborate, because I know you went to the to those rallies. But before you do, there's some questions that I'm getting that I think are directed to you. And let me just pull them up real quick. All right. Raymond, Emma may bring this up. Mark Dury wrote a report entitled UK Grooming Gangs and Islam. There's an interview about the report on Christian Concerns channel. Please consider interviewing Mark about this report. Okay, so in general, I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with this report?
If it's the one that I've read, you should definitely interview him.
Okay, yeah, I know Mark Dury. Yeah,
he looks at theological sort of reasons why. I actually got in trouble for talking about that sort of thing on national television, and it went quite south quite quickly.
I can imagine. But before we move on, let's, a lot of it's sad because the grooming thing that should be, never forgot. But it seems like it's been forgotten because things have only gotten worse. And so it's kind of like old news. So who cares? And we've become desensitized. So just for the record, if you can speak on the grooming gang phenomenon, just like for a couple of minutes, because I think it is integral to, how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, I mean, it was going on for decades, and as far as I know, I think it's still happening. And the authorities did everything that they could to try and prevent justice from actually being done. The government have taken no serious interest in actually doing anything to protect those girls. And I mean, what is there to say about it other than that they didn't want to do it they didn't want to intervene because they didn't want to upset community cohesion or whatever. I mean, this is really, when people say sacrificing girls on the altar of multiculturalism or sacrificing our children on the altar of multiculturalism, I think that's really what they mean. And if anybody's interested in it, I would recommend going and watching the GB News documentary that was made about it. It went into great detail.
Do you know the title so people can look it up?
Just
put GBN News grooming scandal, maybe. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one that, are Muslims in the UK simply bringing their votes, or is there cash involved? IOW, are they donating to in other words, are they donating to campaigns? This is an important question, because I think we were going to talk about how, the Muslim vote phenomenon and how that's working. Any thoughts?
It's provided us with a brilliant segue.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what was the first part of that question? The second part was about funding.
The first part is, are Muslims in the UK simply bringing their votes, or is there cash involved? In other words, are they donating to campaign? Yes. In other words, is it just we're voting for you guys because of whatever and we're working with each other, or maybe they're actually bribing and paying the whatever political party it is? I think that's the question.
I interpreted that to mean, are they funding the campaigns?
Or that, bribing or funding. I mean, semantics, but okay.
So where to begin on this? I mean, if the question is about corruption, there are some, I've got some specific details on this. So in terms of voting fraud, there are two reports that have been released so far by a Westminster-based think tank called Policy Exchange, and they've looked into what they're calling Islamopopulism. So that refers to all of these sort of independent candidates and this organization that's called the Muslim Vote, and there's also a separate one called Vote Palestine. And they did some research into Muslims' attitudes and experiences and stuff, and we can go into some of that data if it's interesting to you. But one of the interesting findings was that 14% of Muslims said that they had had a postal vote collected by a candidate activist or campaigner. And apparently Muslims are twice as likely to have experienced electoral fraud in some sense. And there's this whole conversation around the election in Gorton and Denton as to whether or not there had been family voting. Some of the people who witness what happens in the polling stations had said that they had witnessed some family voting, but that was disputed. But there have been some serious cases, like big cases in the UK. One of them, actually, interestingly, is Lutfur Rahman, who was and is actually the mayor of Tower Hamlets. So it's an area that has a very, very large Muslim population. And he had been, and I'm going to use the exact wording here because I don't want to get in trouble for saying it wrong. He was removed and disbarred from office for 5 years in 2015 after a court found him guilty of corrupt and illegal practices, including postal voting fraud. And when he was out of office, he founded a new party called the Aspire Party in 2018, which then he ran on again when he was allowed to run the next time round. He then became mayor in 2022 and then was recently re-elected in the last local elections in Tower Hamlets, and also managed to get more seats. So they took Labour's majority from that council. And one of the other cases that this report mentions is a case in 2005 that ruled that there had been widespread fraud involving 6 Labour Muslim councillors in Birmingham. And police apparently found a warehouse that they said they'd been filling in thousands of postal ballots on an industrial scale. So it's interesting that 14% of British Muslims have handed over their postal ballot to, and it's a question about, you know, how do differences within communities affect democracy? Because if we're talking about increasing sectarianism, we're talking about communities that marry their own cousins and bring them from abroad. They're a very closed community that isn't integrated with the rest of the country. How does that affect democracy? And that's the question that underlies all of this stuff to do with the Muslim Vote Organization and all these independent candidates, because what we're seeing here is the breakdown of civic democracy and the beginning of sectarian voting, which is completely alien to British democracy. But it's a very organized campaign to get certain candidates elected. And we can go into detail if you want to.
Yeah. Here's another question that's actually a good segue to get to what we're going to talk about. And it basically says, what worries me is this racism, two-tier stuff, and uneducated people not knowing where we are headed. Emma is clearly educated. Emma, who invented the Jewish armbands for Jews in World War II? Raymond, tell her what the zunar is. Okay, I can tell you what the zunar is, but do you want to answer the armbands?
I don't know the answer. No.
I think where they're going with this is the zunar is basically dhimmis, non-Muslims living under Islamic authority, Christians and Jews who were subjects and had to pay tribute and were basically second-class citizens, had to wear certain belts and colors. So I think they're saying that the people who invented the Jewish armbands would have been, I guess in this case, Nazis. In other words, the idea is people are uneducated, and this two-tier system, as we're talking about, is clear proof. I think this is what the question is saying, is clear proof that the people above you are up to no good, and they're literally trying to kill you. Okay, whether you're Jews in Germany or not, not dhimmis in Egypt or Syria, or regular native Brits in Britain, and to combine this with what you just said. Okay, so we were just talking now about Muslim fraud, voting fraud. So on top of everything else, okay, so on top of the government lying basically and doing everything against its own native population, now you also have electoral fraud, okay, and as this question posits, is basically they are openly against you. Okay, so this is why I say it's a perfect segue. So I guess now you can tell me the response, which is the rally, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. As in the rally on the
recent conservative right-wing rally,
Oh,
the racists and the hooligans, as it's being presented as.
Well, so first I will just say, I want to add to what I was saying about the fraud thing, that the issue here actually is not fraud. The issue here is that, I mean, it's totally above board what is happening in terms of the organization of the Muslim vote.
That they are not assimilating, and they're openly saying this is a weapon for us to use to get what we as one tribe want. And so let's cohesively work together. And in other words, it just doesn't have the spirit of democracy about it, which is open-minded, individual thinking. This is just tribalism, and let's weaponize this democracy business to get what we want. Is that kind of it?
It's about voting. It's about voting for the benefit of the Muslim community.
Oh.
And it's so, if I don't want to derail us from your question about the march. So maybe I should say something about the march and then come back to this, or shall I say something about this?
No, say something about this and we'll get to the march.
So this is a big thing. So according to the Policy Exchange report, they found that at least, possibly over 100 Muslim independent councillors were elected at the last local election. So this is the one that just happened a couple of weeks ago, 10 days ago-ish. And that was adding to the dozens that were already in place, and also to the 4 independent Muslim MPs that were elected at the last general election. Then in addition to this, there's a separate analysis that's been done by the Henry Jackson Society. And they have estimated that 574 sectarian candidates were elected overall at these local elections. So that's actually 1 in 10 of all of the candidates in England were sectarian in some way. And they define sectarian as, quote, repeatedly and saliently foregrounding issues of Muslim communal grievance or transnational Muslim causes as part of their political appeal. Now, the reason why there's this disparity in numbers is because the Henry Jackson Society also looking at what they define as sectarian candidates who are running for the Greens, the Independents as well, and also Labour and the Lib Dems. The largest number is actually amongst the Greens in their calculation, with the Independents second. And the reason why I mention these numbers, and the reason why this is important, is because the Muslim vote are not only coordinating with these independent candidates, they're also coordinating and endorsing candidates from other parties, like Green candidates in seats where there is no Islamo-populist standing. And they're coordinating with the ends in mind that what they're doing is they're endorsing a particular candidate because the end that they're aiming for is these particular issues that they in the Muslim community care about. It's about bringing basically unifying the Ummah in Britain and voting according to Muslim interests, not only here, but also abroad. So like realigning Britain's transnational alliances and things like that as well. And they have this thing called the 5 election plan spanning 25 years. So they're really thinking long term about this. And we're just at the very beginning of what this is looking like and how it might shape our democracy. Because you have to realize the Muslim population is going up rapidly. Mm-hmm. I think it's gone up something like 44% in the last, so between 2001 and 2011. Someone might check that for me because I'm not sure that's off the top of my head. But the Muslim population is going up rapidly. It's also in certain areas, it's highly, highly concentrated. So there are some neighborhoods, some wards in Britain where it's 90 to 95% Muslim. And it's significant enough that in some seats, because we have this system called first past the post, it's not a proportional representation system. Because of first past the post, it means that you only need a small number of Muslims in a particular seat in order to swing it in favor of a certain candidate. So they're thinking very strategically about all of this sort of thing. And one of the things that was in the news this week again off the back of this policy exchange report, is that they're talking about this grand deal, excuse me, this grand deal to with the Green Party, with Zach Polanski's Greens, to divide up the country. And I mean, I can read the quote to you if
go ahead.
Interesting. So this guy Mohammed Jalal, who was one of the people, I think, who was involved in setting up the Muslim vote. I'm not sure if he's still involved anymore, but this is what he said. He said, there needs to be a grand deal, a deal between Muslim independents, your party, which is another minor party, which is completely nuts. It's really very woke. Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Zoltana, they're very, very far left. Muslim independents, your party, and the Green Party, where all decide not to stand in each other's territory, in each other's place. We divide up the country. We don't stand in each other's seats, but we will help each other in those seats where we can help. We've got 80 seats in this country where Muslims are above 10%. In those seats, we may not be able to win an outright candidate, but we'll be able to support, we'll be able to swing them. So they're thinking about this stuff very, very strategically. And as we saw in the recent local elections, they were enormously successful. And they're learning every single local and general election.
For those who don't know, can you just summarize these elections and how they were successful?
So, as I mentioned, the number of candidates that they have achieved. So the local elections, we don't have midterms, but for the first time, this local election was recognized as being of such historical importance in determining, because as I mentioned at the beginning of this, that we see this fracturing of our politics now, where there are two parties, one on the right and one on the sort of Islam left, the Reform Party and the Green Party. And in Gorton and Denton, it was between those two. It wasn't between Labour and the Conservatives. So this is a whole new, scenario, total reshaping of our politics. So that's why these local elections were regarded as so important. Also regarded as so important because they determine Keir Starmer's premiership, because he's now facing being kicked out, and that's a lot more complicated, and maybe we don't have time to go into it. But these were really significant elections, and Reform did very, very well. And at the same time, the Greens and the Independents did very, very well. They won a lot of seats, and they also won seats in parts of the country like Birmingham, where there is the Birmingham Candidates Alliance. And I don't know if you maybe want to get some clips up on the screen. I don't know if
sure, which one? I can try.
Do that, but so the Muslims, so the ones of Ahmed Yaqub and Shakil Afsar.
I have some. I have some of the ones you sent. They may not be the order, but let me play them, and you can opine.
So these guys, they Ahmed Yaqub and Shakil Afsar. Shall we call them? Should we say that they're both characters? And they are running this thing called the Independent Candidates Alliance in Birmingham that has been very successful. If we could play the one of them celebrating.
Is that the horse or?
No. That's, I hope we have time to get to the horse one. No, it's at the very bottom of the list under Shakil Afsar.
All right.
Either one of those.
If we don't have time, I'll let me just pull up the ones that we do have. So let's see, and you can just because I know they're all related somehow. So is this the one?
That's not actually no, that's another one, but we could play that anyway just for fun.
Okay, let me.
This is a guy who was running. I don't know if he actually won, but Patrick Christie's from GB News jokingly referred to him as Halal Capone.
I'm your candidate for Ward End Workers' Party. I want to change a little bit this area. We need something to be good for everyone. We need cleaning, not rats, not holes in the roads. We need to change a little bit the area. Please, on the 7th of May, come to vote. Your support, there will be my good things in the life. I will be with you for everything. What do you need?
Is this Al?
The
Is
best
this the Al
candidate for
Capone?
our community, Julian.
Julian.
A new future for our community. No Julian.
That's enough of that.
So these two guys.
What was that about?
That's, I mean, he I don't even know who he is. He was standing for the Workers' Party, which is another one of these small parties, very, very on the left. I think it might be George Galloway's party, who was sort of like very controversial figure in our politics. And they're also part of the kind of Muslim vote ecosystem. I think that they may, I'm not sure if they've made some deals as to who stands where.
Let me put some other ones on, because they're all telling in their own way, and we can just go through these quickly. Let's see. I've been meaning to ask you about this one, so here we go.
Britain in 2026.
This is in Britain, huh?
Yeah. Guy was elected as a councillor, apparently, according to the video. I don't know whether, I mean, it might be worth saying now that so
yeah, okay, so look, your time is I know your time is short, so let's tell me what you can about the recent rally and the protests. And on the one hand, I mean, I know how it is, but just so everyone understands, tell us how it's being presented, because it seems like it's being presented by the official government, the mainstream media, as it sounds to me like it's being presented, first of all, as much smaller than it really was, because I've seen videos and it looks humongous. Okay. And it's again, it's being kind of dismissed like, oh, these are just a bunch of convicts and, you know, people with bad records and racists and whatever. But earlier you were basically saying, no, these are just normal, good people who are just sick and tired of seeing their country being stolen from under their feet. So go ahead, tell us, were you at, if you can, were you at these rallies, and what did you see and what does it all mean?
Yeah, I mean, so it definitely was bigger than the mainstream media have been reporting it as. I mean, it was absolutely enormous. You could walk for 15 minutes and not get anywhere near the back of the crowd. Someone who was there, who'd been at previous rallies, said to me that she thought that it was maybe a bit smaller than the previous one, but it was still huge. I mean, people were estimating different numbers. I think Doogie Beatty from GB News was suggesting that maybe it was in the hundreds of thousands, I think. So, you know, a couple of 100,000.
That's what it looks like, and people can, you know, look it up and see. But it looked like streets were just thronged with humans, you know.
And I've been to a lot of protests. I didn't go to the previous one of these, but I've been to a lot of them. Like I went to watch the Black Lives Matter protests at, you know, in 2020 and all that kind of thing. And no protest I've ever seen had anything on the size of that march. And while there might have been some wrong-uns in the crowd, and I've seen a few things, you know, here and there, it's a bit sort of like, maybe not, you know, they're certainly not the salt of the earth, but by and large, the vast majority of people there were good English people who just care about their country and are just sick and tired of things. And then if you compare the atmosphere there, I mean, there weren't very many arrests made either. That's the other thing, is the Metropolitan Police actually reported on the number of arrests, and it was really not very much at all. On the other side, and I have a clip of it. I don't know if you want to play it, but under the Nakba March, it's the only link that's there under the title Nakba March. But it might be interesting to see for American viewers that they were chanting about Tommy Robinson and his followers, string them up like Mussolini, shoot them in the neck like Charlie Kirk. So whilst on one side you have all these people who are basically picnicking and, you know, having their sandwiches, and, you know, there were children there, children, elderly people, people in mobility scooters, dogs. It had this like lovely festival atmosphere. Like, people were drinking, but nobody that I saw the whole time I was there was drunk and disorderly. There was nothing remotely aggressive about it. There were people there from all races, backgrounds, whatever. And then the other side, you have people chanting "Globalize the Intifada" and shoot them in the neck like Charlie Kirk.
I think I found the video. Is it this one?
Yeah, that's the
All
one.
right, let me play it. Shoot him in the neck like Charlie Kirk. So
that's not incitement, it would seem.
It's amazing. I mean, imagine, you know, the corresponding kind of phrase about killing a non-white, non-conservative who's been assassinated, and just publicly saying that. Of course, everyone would be arrested.
Yeah, it's totally brazen, because they know that there are not going to be any implications for them.
And so, you know, going back to that all-important question, which I was asking you about, like, why is it like that philosophically, psychologically? I think the easiest way to understand it is the authorities they feel like, okay, there's a law and we have to follow it, but they empathize, they sympathize with that side. They're convinced that side is okay and right. That's what it is. They just believe that that side, that narrative is correct, and your side is the bad side. And yeah, we're the authorities, so we have to be fair. But in our hearts, we know you're the bad guy. Therefore, when you do anything, if you just step out of line by just one iota, we will bring all the force of the law on you. And if you're the other guy and you do all kinds of things, well, that's okay. We'll turn a blind eye.
It's also a nuisance for them too, because they want mass migration. They want to transform the country. I mean, some of them are real ideologues that want Britain to be, as I said before, year zero. They want to, they hate everything about this country, and they want to scrub it all clean, and they want to have mass migration. They want to transform our institutions. They want, you know, revolution, really. I mean, even if it's not revolution in the sense of, you know, the Bolsheviks, they want revolution in the sense of, you know, Tony Blair's revolution. He completely transformed our institutions, destroyed our constitution. He's the one who first flung open the doors to mass migration, and our country has been slowly transformed more and more in that direction. It's a political pain in the backside for any government to have people who are refusing to be walked all over. Because if you think about it, you know, I think the statistic is something like 1.5 million migrants are on benefits. That's in addition to the fact that we're putting all these people up when they come over. We put them in nice hotels. We pay for them. They get 3 meals a day. They get all sorts of perks and benefits. It's almost like we're advertising ourselves to the people smugglers. There's this whole industry, this whole economy surrounding mass migration. The British people are being expected to pay for their own demise. And it's not convenient for the government that there are people who are annoyed about this. And it's even more inconvenient for the government that those are normal, decent, good people and not far-right thugs. Whatever the government might think of the people who organize a rally or the people who speak at a rally, all that they need to do is take a walk through the crowd and actually speak to the people and understand their concerns. But they have this idea in their head, really, that the white British population are kind of like the boogeyman.
But they're white, right? These people we're talking about, we're not talking about Muslims who took over. We're talking about born native Brits who've been so intellectually addled that they just hate themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean,
They
it's
hate their culture.
like I say, it's philosophical, it's psychological. There is an element to this that is almost like a kind of, it's not mass psychosis, but it's some kind of mass, mental
Demonic.
issue.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you could say in the kind of sense of, Dostoevsky, that there is a kind of, there's a
He wrote a
possessed.
book called Demons, so yeah. And
It's like our society has become ideologically possessed, and the majority of people are not, actually, I think, fairly immune to it, and are trying to do something about it, and are being, ironically, demonized for trying to do so. I don't know. I know we're obviously like running quite short on time, but one of the things that I thought was so interesting, particularly probably for your viewers because it's Crusades related, is what the people who were involved in the Muslim vote said about Saladin and how
Let's hear
they.
it. Yeah.
So there are two clips. One of them is by a guy who's involved with the Muslim vote. The other one is by a guy who is the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. And they talk about making, both of them in different ways, talk about the mission of creating the conditions that would allow a figure like Saladin to emerge. But obviously they're talking about it in the British context. So
I think I can pull it up. I have one of them right now. If you have a second, let me see. Okay. There we go. Because this is worth.
Yeah, we can't miss this bit out because it's.
Seriously. Okay.
It's classic Raymond content.
This one, right?
Yeah. So this guy is back in Nana Bauer, and he's the one who's affiliated in some way with the Muslim vote.
All right, let's. I got it at the 40-second mark. I think.
Proud anti-Zionist, right?
Right.
And so change is possible. You just got to keep going for it. And then, if I always tell people you have to be prepared for the moment that change can happen, or as I say, you should be ready for when Salahuddin comes. I know that's it's not perhaps the best way to phrase it, but it's always.
I mean, in its context, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
In its context, it makes perfect sense.
Salahuddin would never have been able to recapture Jerusalem if the conditions were not right for him. Right? He's not. One leader is not a magical, mythical being. I know sometimes that's how we tell history, but Salahuddin was, the structures, the social structures, the military structures, the ulama, the teaching at that time in his area enabled him to create an army, to create a infrastructure that not only liberated Istanbul, liberated Jerusalem, but also liberated in Jerusalem in an unbelievably just way, right? And made it a city where everyone, Muslims, Jews and Christians, could live, could practice their faith, and make it a center of excellence. And I think, if we don't create that infrastructure, then we can carry on saying where is the next Malcolm X, where is the next Salahuddin, but they can never emerge if we don't carry on waiting, organizing and preparing for that day.
We need to create.
Wow.
You see the ideological sort of cross sort of contamination there between Islam, and you have Malcolm X together. It's this sort of it's happening on the left, but it's also happening within the kind of Muslim thought world as well. And then I don't know if you can play the other one from Wajid Akhtar, but I mean it's based
the other Saladin one.
Yeah. So I mean.
Yeah, I can. Let me get it right now. Because it's important to point this out, because Saladin, it's funny because Saladin is this character who the West loves and thinks he's this noble, awesome, a paragon of whatever, magnanimity. And in reality, okay, here, I found it. Let me pull it up. Okay, here we go.
It feels good to go out and protest. And I'm not saying don't protest. It feels good to write a letter. And I'm not saying don't write a letter. And it feels good to boycott. And I'm not saying don't boycott. I'm not saying all that. But if you want to move from feeling good to actually succeeding, we need to start work now. We need to become a powerful community. We need to become a united community. We need to become an organized community. We need to become an educated community. We need to become a rich community. We need to become an Islamic community rather than just a community of people who happen to be Muslims. We need to change. And that change, if it doesn't start now, it has to. I'll finish with this one point, because sometimes people listen to me and they say that, Wallah, you know, that's not going to fix things today. You're talking about the future. Yes, I'm talking about the future. The problem is we all want Salah ad-Din today. We all want Salah ad-Din to come today, right? But no one wants to be his father. No one wants to be his dad or his mom. You will not get Salah ad-Din until you build the environment for Salah ad-Din. You will not get Salah ad-Din until you become his teacher, until you become his madrasa, until you become his helper and his friend and his ecosystem. Build that first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send you Salah ad-Din after Salah ad-Din after Salah ad-Din until you don't know what to do with them. My final point. Always do what you can. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do what you can't.
You
All
tell
right.
me, what does that mean?
Well, I definitely plan on unpacking this Salah ad-Din business, but I know you're on a tight schedule. So
Give 5 minutes more if you want
What's
to.
that?
I can do
Okay,
5 minutes
well,
if you want to.
okay. Well, there's a few questions for you, so I wanted to pull those up. Let's see here. All right, here we go. Emma, your voting system is going to be the death of the UK. You need electoral reform. A modified border system would make it hard for these nuts to get elected.
Yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? I'd love a modified border. I'd like a border, actually.
Yeah, an actual border, right?
If only we could build a wall, you know. But unfortunately, it turns out that being an island and having a moat isn't sufficient protection. It's actually working against us. I know Winston Marshall has been saying, you know, we need to build a floating wall in the middle of the channel to try and do something about it. The thing about the voting is that there are pros and cons in either direction. So it's not just you know, that it would be a straightforward fix if we went over to proportional representation, because that would also be very destabilizing. And there are downsides to that as well. So you will, like you have in the Netherlands, you have parties like Denk, which are a similar kind of, I think there's some Turkish element to them. They're kind of Islamo left, I think, also. And, you know, they've done very well reasonably well under proportional representation, and you end up with coalitions that form against the majority. So it wouldn't necessarily be a quick fix to just get rid of first past the post.
Okay, here's another one. God bless Emma. Please keep speaking up. We are praying for you and for everyone courageously standing up for the truth.
Thank you, rational human.
Yeah. Here's another one. Lies destroy lives. Emma, have you seen Raymond's live stream about Tawreya and Tekeya? Super important. Yeah, I have a couple of live streams about Islamic deception, kind of getting to the heart and the doctrine of what you are seeing manifest itself right now in your country.
I know it's amazing that we've been talking for an hour and a half and we haven't even barely scratched the surface. You know, there's so much.
I know, and I hate it because I know you have to go. So, I did have one last question. I'll ask you once you're all done. If you are done, that's fine. Or what? So, what can we take away from everything? What does it all mean, Basil?
We're in trouble, and it helps us when the United States makes it things like free speech a diplomatic issue. It helps when Americans, you know, talk about the civilizational consequences of mass migration in Britain, because the people here need help to really save us, in a sense, from our own political establishment. What we're seeing now is, I think, that the great realignment that has been happening over the last, frustrated somewhat for various reasons, over the last 10 years. I think we're entering into a period in British political history that will be something, as Mary Harrington has made this point too, that there are similarities with the 17th century. things are being fundamentally transformed. Politically, technologically, also with AI, there are all sorts of sort of tributaries running into this, making the situation even more complex. But the demographic issue is really serious. The Muslim population are expanding both through migration and also because they have higher birth rates than the rest of the population. So the impact of Islam on our politics going forward is going to be I think, the defining issue. I'm worried that David Betts is right about the civil war argument. But what we're seeing now is a really organized, professional, concerted effort on the part of organizations like the Muslim Vote to coordinate Muslim voters to vote for particular ends that serve a particular community. And they are learning very quickly at every election, and that will have a huge impact on our democracy. And like I say, both Gorton and Denton and also the local elections, they were sort of little litmus tests on the road to the next general election. What we're seeing now is the implosion of the Labour Party. We may very well get a much more to the left prime minister, because just very quickly,
Wow.
what's happened because these local election results are so devastating is that Keir Starmer is being pressured into resigning. One of the people who wants to run to be prime minister is a guy called Andy Burnham, who is currently the mayor of Manchester. He stepped back from that in order he basically triggered a by-election by getting another MP to stand down so that he can run in this area called Makefield in Manchester. Because of the demographics, because it's an area that's so pro-reform, voted so much for reform in these local elections recently, and also in the last general election, Reform came second to Labour, and Labour only won by about 6,000 votes. So it's not a given that Andy Burnham will win, but he is to the left of Keir Starmer. And he's also very pro-EU. And if he were to win that seat, it's almost a given that any other candidates, people like Wes Streeting, who Americans have probably never heard of, any candidates like that won't stand a chance against Andy Burnham, because Andy Burnham is so popular amongst the Labour membership that he will almost certainly become the next prime minister. And that will take Britain off down a very, very dark road, I think. And the situation with the borders and everything will be irresolvable. We're running out of time because the situation is getting so bad so fast. By the time we get to the next general election, it will be the defining moment, I think, politically in my lifetime, probably even in a couple of generations. It feels here as if we are at an important moment in our nation's history. And I would just beg Americans, please pay attention to what's happening here, and please be on our side, because we need you. Don't leave us alone with these people.
Okay, and we spoke before, you and I, and you expressed a similar sentiment to my own, which is that you're pessimistic in general. Are you pessimistic in regards to this upcoming, defining election, or are you optimistic?
I think that Reform are running a candidate who is a local guy. They're pitching it as David versus Goliath, because Andy Burnham is this big national figure. There's something a bit cynical about him forcing a constituency into a by-election just because he wants to become prime minister. And the guy that they're running against him is this local salt-of-the-earth guy. He's a plumber. He's from the area. Reform already have a really good. I apologize, my cat is meowing.
I'm used to it. I know, it's all right. Better than a dog barking, so
he's worried too. This guy who's running for Reform, he has the benefit of Reform having come in second place already in the last general election with a very, very solid share of the vote. It's a constituency that is very reformy. It's the sort of place you would expect would win. If Reform win that seat, then it suggests that Reform could absolutely clear up nationally, we might end up with Prime Minister Nigel Farage. If they lose, I think it will be devastating for the country. It will be a very bad sort of sign for Reform as a party. But I do think that they have a good chance of winning. Now, the reason why I'm pessimistic still is because the Restore Britain, this other party, this small party,
Rupert Lowe.
yes, he's decided to run a candidate also in the Makefield by-election, which of course will split the vote. I think, given the large number of votes that Reform got at the last general election, that Rupert is putting his party before the country, because he's potentially risking us having Andy Burnham as Prime Minister, which would be a disaster. So it's possible that if the Tories were willing to stand aside their candidate, which is something I think Jacob Rees-Mogg has suggested, the Tories stand aside their candidate, Reform win the seat, it starts to turn things in the right direction. Maybe we end up on a positive cycle. Who knows? Generally speaking, I'm pessimistic. I really do. I think it's difficult to call what will happen at that general election. So it's kind of all to play for in a sense. But everything is at stake. I know lots of political journalists are saying that this is the most important by-election in their lifetime.
Well, out of curiosity, the rally in Saturday and all those, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people, would you say their convictions and beliefs align more with Reform or Restore?
It's a mix. I spoke to people while I was there who were, I would say it was probably 50-50.
Okay, so then I confuse them. The Rupert Lowe one does have a significant amount of. I've been through that a million times. I'm glad this is the first interview where someone else has the cat, not me. So good. So the Rupert Lowe party is actually well represented in amongst this population that took to the streets.
I mean, I only spoke to a handful of people, so I don't. It's not exactly scientific enough to say it's a good share. Some of the people I spoke to one of the people I spoke to there had actually campaigned for him in Great Yarmouth, and they won Great Yarmouth. So I don't think they stood anyone anywhere other than Great Yarmouth, but they stood candidates in the place where Rupert Lowe is MP, and they did well there. But I think, it would be an interesting poll to conduct, would be to see amongst the sorts of people who had attended Unite the Kingdom, which way they would be more likely to vote. But I would say it was roughly 50-50, the people I spoke to. I'd say there were probably more Restore people there than you would get in the general population, but that's just a hunch.
So another way, though, of looking at it is if they both were one party, then you guys would win.
Yeah, but it's
as
not
opposed to splitting the vote, right?
Yeah, the thing to do actually would be to have the kind of discipline that the Muslim vote are having.
Yeah.
Not stand rival candidates.
Not talk about how to give birth to Saladin, but how to give birth to Richard.
Yeah. Well, there were some people who were dressed as him at the rally. I think so. The Muslim vote learned at the last election that if you have two Islamic populists standing against each other, then you're not going to, you're not being as strategic and as disciplined as you need to be. I think that was the lesson that they learned, and I really think that that Restore should not be standing candidates. I don't think that Restore should be standing a candidate actually in this Makefield by-election, because I think so much is at stake. But there's personal politics in there too. So I think you could. It's not totally infeasible that you could have some kind of alliance between the Conservatives and Reform, but I don't think you could have an alliance between. And although that might be toxic for Reform, but I don't see any possibility of a Restore Reform alliance, and I just think they're just not on the same page, and there's too much personal politics in there.
All right. I know you got to go, but one very last question about something you said, and you can be quick about it. But it's something you said in the very beginning. It's actually the only thing I wrote down because it interested me. And you made a point about a lot of these people.
The rest will interest you, Raymond.
Oh, I know. I mean, no, it all interested me, but this was something I wanted to follow up on specifically because it deals with what I do. And you said at this rally, these, you were talking about how these people are normal, they're good people, and then you said something about how they're starting to realize that Christianity is part of their identity. Okay, what does that mean? Because I don't think you appreciate how loaded and the significance, or maybe you do appreciate, which is why I'm asking you to elaborate what that means.
Well, as you know, that is my
That's my cue to go.
my other wheelhouse. I think I sent you a picture from the rally of a guy who was, and it's, if anyone is interested, they can go and have a look on my Twitter. I posted it. An Iranian guy. So there was a large Iranian contingent, and I was told by Mai Artusi, I think it was, who is himself an Iranian activist. He was saying that there were quite a lot of Iranian Christians there. And this guy was holding the Union flag and also the royalist Iranian flag. It was interesting. On both sides, you had two versions of the Iranian flags on one protest to the other. And he was holding up a painting, a sort of painted placard of King Baldwin of Jerusalem as depicted in Kingdom of Heaven.
The famous...
Yeah, there were a lot of people there who were dressed, or a good
Crusader
number of
imagery,
who were dressed as knights, who were dressed as crusaders. There were complaints from the powers that be, that including in the church, not just at this rally but at the previous one, of people picking up crucifixes and walking with them at these rallies because they're using Christian symbols for political means. And maybe you don't disagree. Perhaps they disagree with the politics of the people who are marching with the crosses, but I don't think that you can say that you have a monopoly on those symbols. And I don't think it's right to say that those people who are carrying crosses, who have brought with them flags that say things like Christian values, or somebody had a picture of a Greek Orthodox icon on a flag. Somebody had the fish on a flag. It was almost kind of like a pilgrimage, some of the iconography.
That's what crusades were. They were armed pilgrimages.
And, well, I mean, it looked a little bit like that scene from Kingdom of Heaven where you see the crosses coming out of the mist. And I think that this is all part and parcel of the sort of... I've heard a lot of people said to me when I spoke to them at this rally that this is a spiritual battle. And they are starting to see things in terms of, I think, in terms that are not appreciated by the church leadership, not appreciated maybe by the leadership of the Church of England, by the bishops, who think that there's something cynical, that these people are just picking up these crosses and it's just like a badge of, maybe as you might have had in Northern Ireland, perhaps, where it just becomes a symbol of your identity, that you're just not Muslim. I don't think that's what's going on. Maybe there's some of that, but by and large, it seems to me that this is not a cynical thing. These are people who are being baptized, who are going to church, who are finding Christ. I saw a lot of people in, cassocks and dog collars walking in the march. So there's something really sincere that's going on there. And I think part of it is that Christianity in Britain has really been crushed in some ways by, or suffocated by, the leadership of the Church of England, because the leadership of the Church of England, in parallel to the government, has turned its back on the people and has become very ideological. We're bringing in all of these extraneous ideologies, net zero, Black Lives Matter, all of this stuff, and not preaching the gospel, and are not doing their job as the shepherd of the national flock. And people are finding the faith on their own. We're seeing a kind of quiet revival in our churches, particularly in more traditional forms of worship, where people are looking for something serious. They're not looking for the kind of happy clappy stuff that the kind of gruel that the boomers preferred. They're looking for something, like red meat. They want something deeply theological. And I really think that something sincere is going on. And I don't think that they should be dismissing it as superficial or purely political. They should just go out and talk to these people and make their own minds up, because I'm sure that some of these bishops have not had those conversations.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And I would actually interpret it by saying that what you're seeing is an organic Christian revival, the way Christianity should be. And these bishops that you're referring to are actually, for lack of a better word, the fraudulent version. But we have it mixed in our mind where, they're the authorities, they're the true representatives of Christianity. But we're seeing organically that no, they're actually on the side of all the ills that you just delineated today. They're helping facilitate that.
People are going on pilgrimages again, and it's not. I mean, Britain is a bit odd in the sense that it's Protestant in a sense, but it's still at least in my part of the Church of England, which is Anglo-Catholic, is still quite Catholic. So it lives
Anglicanism.
It lives in this kind of pardon the pun, purgatory. And I'm not going to say which one of those is heaven or hell, but I think we're seeing something that is a sort of natural return to, or an attempt to try and retrieve our heritage and the seriousness of it, because the seriousness has been denigrated by, our cathedrals have been doing things like putting helter-skelters in them and putt-putt courses and hosting silent discos and raves and stuff like that. And people are allergic to it. Yeah. And it actually, in a way, it kind of drives people towards the
Islam.
truth. In some cases,
anything actually, it drives people to anything. Yeah.
And you do see people converting to Islam, and I think that those people. Sorry, my cat's now got the zoomies. I think you do see people who are converting to Islam because they are looking for something serious and they haven't found it in the mainstream church in England. But I've been working in this area on Islamism, and related issues for a decade now, and have been publicly talking about Christianity since around the time of the pandemic, so since around 2020, 2021. And I have seen a massive change in the way that people respond to faith claims when when you're just in a normal conversation on national television. There's more of an openness to it now. It passes the dinner party test. There's less of a kind of ick about religion now. People are, I think, becoming much more open to our Christian heritage in a way that it seems to have happened all of a sudden. And to get very Christian about it, I think that is partly the hand of divine providence. And I think that those people who say that we are engaged in a spiritual battle here for the soul of our country are right. And I don't mean that, for Keir Starmer, if Keir Starmer is watching, I mean that obviously in the spiritual sense. I know that the word battle makes some people frightened.
Battle has all sorts of symbolic meanings. Yeah. Need not be physical. Yeah. Okay.
But I think that there really is something is in the air. I mean, you were at the Christian Revival Conference in Oxford as well recently, and something's going on. And I think the Church of England leadership is so out of touch that they think it's this, awful. It actually scares them too. It gives them the heebie-jeebies in the same way that it does Keir Starmer. Yeah. They're wrong. Yeah. They will learn that they're wrong, because their church will either fall apart or it will see a revival. Those are the two options, because it can't continue on the road it's on.
And that's the thing. This revival is very organic, and it's manifesting itself all around the Western world, in the U.S., in England, in Britain, in Europe, in pockets, and that's how it's authentic and sincere. It's not, we're the organized group, we're the bishops, we say how it goes, and everything they say is essentially aligned with the government. They're mouthpieces for the government essentially. But what you're seeing is very much, like I said, literally organic. And what's also interesting about it, from my perspective, and most people don't know this, is that it's historic. Okay, so what people are, the way people are behaving naturally now, and the way this Christian revival is manifesting itself, is almost identical to how Christianity was practiced in Europe for well over 1,000 years. So, and most people don't know that because most people have been bred into thinking that the bishop's version of Christianity is the real one, but everyone's sensing it's not, and it's fake.
Why is it that your work has gone so viral and so many people are sort of thirsting for it? It's because they need the revival of their historical memory. And we even saw this bizarrely at the Eurovision Song Contest with the Croatian entry, with the Ottoman Ottoman tattoos to identify people as Christians. They would get kidnapped. I mean, this would have been unthinkable. So everything is changing. The 2020s, as Jacob Rees-Mogg pointed out, whether it's the 1720s, the 1820s, or the 1920s, the 2020s. The 20s are always a horrible decade, but I think that it will be decisive in the future of Britain and what kind of nation we become, whether we're even recognizable. Because on current predictions, the white British population are due to be minorities by 2060. Is Britain without
once you're the minority, game over. I think once you're just only 60% of the, or 65%, game over. Okay, if you know what I mean, if that makes any sense.
The culture, the character of the country will be completely transformed. We don't. I mean, plenty of people are saying it. We'll end up like Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. All right, Emma, I know you need to go. And so thanks a lot for all your insights. And we'll have to do it again, maybe after this forthcoming election, if Britain is still alive at that point.
Gosh, well, I hope it's not Prime Minister Andy Burnham.
Well, if hopefully your pessimism won't manifest itself in reality.
You want to see me cry.
Either way, we'll have you back and we'll discuss it. You can give us the scoop again. So thanks for those insights, because it's always good to talk to someone who's on the ground and actually is passionately involved with the issues, as opposed to someone who understands it theoretically. So, all right. Thank you, and have a good evening.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Bye. Well, everyone, so there it is. Now you've seen, now you've heard, and I was glad that Emma was here to explain all that to you, because a lot of that, I don't know, the nitty-gritty technical electoral aspects. But now that she's gone, I do want to take your super chats, the ones that I didn't, and then there are a few points that I should like to elaborate and talk about. And so let's see now. Lies destroy lives. Muslims support for the liberals in the UK sounds a bit like Al Jazeera in English and Al Jazeera in Arabic. They know what will bring us down. Yeah, that's true. But like I was saying, the weird thing isn't that the weird thing for me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the context of the Saladin videos that we saw. The weird thing isn't that Muslims think this way or act this way or talk this way. The weird thing is that the Brits, despite all that, just go along with it. Okay, kind of like this is okay. We don't get it. And this is the part that I don't get. Okay. Murderer was Sikh. Victim was British immigrant from Poland who had become a citizen. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's in regard to the story that she was telling us, which is surreal, about some altercation recently. And so I guess a Sikh stabbed a Pole who was a British citizen, a white guy. And when the police came, even though the Pole was bleeding to death, all the Sikh had to say is that he called me a word, racist word, and the police handcuffed the British Pole until he bled to death. All right. Think about that for a moment. Okay. I mean, I've already elaborated on how warped that is. but 3 people were killed at a mosque in San Diego. Did you read that? I did. And I think it's unfortunate. And I think it's also the result of what happens when information, knowledge, history, doctrine is suppressed and people finally learn, and then they get frustrated and angry, and then they lash out like that. You know where this doesn't happen? It doesn't happen in Russia, where there's way more mosques, because everyone knows everything and understands it. It doesn't happen in countries that said, like Poland and Hungary, that we don't want mosques. Okay, so in a way, this violence happens because you're putting 2 groups that either one's going to dominate the other, which is what Islam is doing in Britain, or one is going to, find out and retaliate in ugly ways, and that's what you saw with the mosque shooting. That's not a good way. I'm definitely against that. But when people feel like I've been lied to for decades and made to feel like I'm the bad guy, and in fact, you're bringing in all these people and destroying my country, and then they go crazy and they go and shoot mosques, which is really unfortunate, which is why I say it's always best to just have the truth out in the open from the get-go. Then no one gets angry and people follow normal policies, and nobody gets killed, and you don't have these ugly episodes. More on that on another time, perhaps. Lies destroy lives. Raymond, please give a shout out for the Raymond Ibrahim, Dan Burmawi, and Mark Dury group. All right, shout out. It's small now, but it's going to be bigger than Ben-Hur. I won't ask for another shout out till we reach 5,000 members. Okay, cool. Good luck, and thank you. Yeah, okay, we saw that one. Look up majority Borda hybrid voting system. That's what the UK needs to stop, the nuts getting power. Okay. Pop the kettle on love with a comma. My local church has effigies of knights from the 13th century with their feet on Saracens and heads on helmets of the enemy. Defending Christendom was foremost for them for 100 years. Yep, that's very true. And that's everywhere, actually, throughout Europe, especially Spain and Portugal, because they had such a long history with Islam, kicking them out of the peninsula, that Spain's patron saint, Matamoros, St. James the Moor slayer, and exactly what you described, that's what they have. Statues and paintings of him trampling on turbaned Saracen, that is Moor heads. There's a reason why history records all that, but hey, those who forget history, fill in the rest, are doomed to repeat it. I meant my colleagues don't know what a caliphate is, nor Dhimmi Takeya. Zunar was 7th, 9th century pact of Omar and Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. Current media says white World War II invention, one-sided history. Yeah, everything is one-sided history, and that's why people don't know these words and these concepts that we're talking about right now. The people from the past, including of Europe, if you would bring them to see what's going on today, they just couldn't. They would be, so you've decided to commit suicide by bringing your inveterate historical perennial enemy to do what they've always done to you. That's how it would be seen and understood. Your voting system was not designed to deal with crazies. The people who set it up probably never thought things would get this crazy. I agree with that, actually. Democracy and voting, in its origin, especially in the United States, the whole concept of democracy, or, in the 18th century when it was being championed amongst such peoples, was that you, the citizen who votes, are highly educated. Not educated through TikTok or Instagram or Twitter, actually literally classically educated so you can think on your own and deal with facts and make a decision. That's the beauty of a democracy. You have an electoral body who votes, and they're all intelligent and literally truly educated, not indoctrinated. Today, in the West, people are indoctrinated to think certain ways, and then they all have the right to vote. And you see what you're seeing. Is it shocking? Okay, if Constantinople falls, we won't be getting it back, so to speak. We must remember Surah 9:5. Yeah, Surah 9:5 is a sword verse which just allows unmitigated jihad on everyone and abrogates well over 120 verses. It's what we were talking about, the Medina verse of violence. And yeah, I know what you mean by Constantinople. I mean, it did fall, of course. The anniversary is coming up. But yeah, Britain is on the verge of doing it. But there's a difference. Always remember that the difference is when Constantinople fell, it did everything to survive. It knew it didn't invite Islam. It fought it tooth and nail. The difference is, as I often say, if Britain falls or if Europe falls, it won't be from an Islamic invasion. It'll be from an invitation by the host society. And that never happened. That's not how Constantinople fell. All right. Okay. So now let me just make some final observations. Now, you saw those Saladin videos where Muslim politicians were citing and talking about, Saladin doesn't come overnight. You have to prepare an infrastructure for him. Who's going to be the father of Saladin? Well, they're making very, very good points, actually. And it's a very standard point amongst Muslims, which is one about patience and preparation. So the logic is, Saladin's this famous, hero amongst Muslims in the Islamic world, amongst Westerners too, and for perverse reasons, for fake history reasons, which I've talked about before. But so, Saladin is the guy who reconquered Jerusalem back to Islam, got rid of the Crusaders, but he kicked them out of Jerusalem in 1187 after the Battle of Hattin, and he also recovered many other cities and took them away from the Crusaders. So the point is that Saladin wasn't just a character who came out of nowhere, and that's true. The Muslims, up until that point, had been building up and their strength, and had also been building up propaganda. So Nur al-Din, Zengi al-Din's son, and even Zengi al-Din, these are precursors and of the Seljuks, or they were Seljuks, Atabegs, basically warlords, especially Zengi, who conquered Edessa in 1144. But he was the first one, and especially his son, Nur al-Din, who started reharnessing and propagating jihadist rhetoric against the Crusaders. Okay, so one of the complaints amongst Muslims is after the first crusade, the reason that the first crusade was successful, so the argument goes from Muslims, is that Muslims were disunited. They had forgotten about the duties of jihad. They were fighting amongst each other, etc. And there's probably truth to that. And so with this rise of Ahmad al-Din al-Zengi, who conquered Edessa, as I mentioned, in 1144, precipitating the Second Crusade, he, but more so his son, Nur al-Din, really intentionally propagandized jihadism. And they had madrasas and preachers recruiting for jihad the way you hear it today. So when you hear ISIS and the Salafis and these Muslims quoting early historical figures, it's from this era. And it really culminates with someone like Ibn al-Taymiyyah, who's around, he's later than, of course, Saladin. I think he's around the 13th century. But they were all actively working at that. So the point is, Muslims today in Britain and in the West are saying, hey, our time of getting Saladin and getting what we want and conquering and winning is not yet. Now we have to build up to it, whether it's through voting, how we vote as a bloc, through propaganda. Now it's the time to prepare. We're not going to be Saladin. We're going to be the fathers of Saladin, which is logical, makes sense. If you can't have a Saladin without having his father. So you just saw there were two videos, and I've seen more in general of people making this analogy, the Saladin analogy. And she also mentioned, Emma, this thing which I should talk about because it was in the news, Croatia Eurovision, which I've never watched until recently because it had something meaningful. the Croatian band. I think they're called Lelik. It's an all-female band. I've seen them before because people have sent what they do. One of their songs, I think it's called Andromeda, and it basically, the lyrics are about, I don't know how explicit they are, but it's essentially about Croatians and Christians of the Balkan regions being conquered by the Ottoman Muslim Turks and the sufferings they went through and the defiance. But they also appear with all these geometric cross tattoos on their face, on their hands. And what most people don't understand is that those are historic tattoos that Croats actually put on them, on their kids and on themselves and on their women folk, as a way to prevent, if they get kidnapped and sexually abducted, as was often the case, to re-identify them. It was also a form of defiance, reasserting their Christian identity. And so they appeared like that, which of course upset a lot of leftists, upset the Turks, upset Muslims, because it's, oh, how dare you mention, when we were doing what we did to you. And it's funny because I wrote an article on my Substack precisely about this topic. It came out the other day. And one of the observations that is worth remaking is that, imagine telling, blacks in America, don't sing, don't write, don't make movies about slavery because it makes whites look bad. Or telling Jews, don't talk about, Holocaust, don't talk about persecution because it makes, Germans look bad. Can you even imagine that ever happening? No. So why is it when white Christians talk about their historical real suffering, okay, also persecution, slavery, abduction, rape, outright slaughter, the Janissaries, abducting boys and from their parents, turning them into Muslims and forcing them to become jihadis, you can't talk about that. Isn't that interesting how that goes? And another interesting point for me personally is this tattoo business, putting crosses and tattoos. Actually, the oldest group that I know that has done this practice and still does, because they still live amongst Muslims, are the Coptic Christians of Egypt, my heritage. Okay, I've grown up always, I don't have it, but I have relatives and people often young, even when they're young kids, their parents tattoo little Coptic crosses on their wrist. You may have seen this. And that practice goes way back to the 7th century Arab Islamic conquest of Egypt for the very same reasons that I mentioned about Croatia. The difference is Croatians don't do this anymore. You know why? Because they don't live under Islamic/Ottoman authority. Copts in Egypt still do it. Why? Well, because they live in a Muslim majority nation where their women folk do get abducted and get raped, and their children, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it's also a form of defiance. And it was also and it even gets them identified. There's several stories of Copts, people killing them in Egypt and elsewhere. ISIS in Libya, the 21 Copts who got beheaded, it was because they were identified because of their cross. So it even gets them killed, and that's why it is actually a form of defiance as well. But anyway, that's what happened at Eurovision recently, and good for the Croatian people and for that band for making a historical point. Everyone else does. Everyone else harps about historical crimes, don't they? Why can't Christians and Europeans ever once talk about it, even when it was just as bad, if not oftentimes worse, than other grievances that are institutionalized essentially? All right, I think I've gone on for long enough. And as far as Britain goes, you've heard what Emma said, and you've seen the situation, and you've also you've heard how there's certain things that I really stressed and talked about. She was mentioning, of course, the election and the votes and all that's important, but I have this, my brain thinks, to me, those are temporal aspects. They're reflections of things in the now, but I always like to look at the deeper questions, which is why I really, kind of pressed the topics of why is this happening on a philosophical level? Why is it you have, Brits, born Brits, okay, literally DNA Brits, who've been turned to the point of hating their heritage. And this is something you'll never see in any other country, any other civilization. This is something very peculiar to Western people. And I've always found it interesting. Is it just something organic? Because if it is, that would be weird, because that would suggest that races are different. And we can never say that. So I think it's something actually designed, something by design that's happening. And, and to me, that's one of the root causes, which is behind everything we're talking about in Britain and in the West in general. Okay. This sort of self-hatred, which is so antithetical to every other culture, rightfully so, because it doesn't make any sense. Every other culture, no matter how bad one's culture is, non-Western cultures, they all venerate their ancestors, and they'll whitewash them too if they have to. And yet in Europe, there's this situation where, no, our ancestors, no matter, even though they created the civilization that the world wants to go live in, yeah, they're all evil, and we have to denounce and hate them. So I find that very interesting. I find that to be at the core of everything we're talking about. This is the substantial core. And the flip side, which we talked about, which I briefly alluded to, is when she said, that really pricked my ear when she said people are now starting to notice Christianity is part of their identity. Why I find that interesting is because most people, for the longest time, and it's still the case, Christianity is an abstract individual idea. It's some spiritual high that they have, and then that's it. They live their secular, worldly, for all intents and purposes, atheistic lifestyle. And what you're seeing now is sort of, no, it's not just that. It's something more social, something more cultural, something political. Okay. And guess what? That is how most religions have been historically, including Christianity. It's this recent, turning Christianity into an abstract idea that I just do in my mind. That's the weird aberration. Even though it's been around for so long that people take it for granted and assume this is Christianity. But as we were pointing out, it's falling by the wayside no matter what they do. And in its place, you're getting this organic growth of this sort of cultural identity, Christianity, which I think is a great, healthy thing. Okay. I've always believed that the best thing is to have that and to have a society built along that. And then once you have that, which is a conducive environment for any would-be Christian, and then you can individually get right with God, ideally. Okay. But there's nothing wrong with creating a good, conducive society. It's called kingdom building, which is actually in the Bible, and which is what most Christians historically did believe in. Nothing wrong with that. There's this idea of, no, Christianity has to be, including from Christians saying, no, we have to separate it constantly. And it's just something you do in your mind, and then just get along with the government, get along with the world, appease everyone, be a doormat, et cetera, et cetera. That's the sort of thing that has directly led to what we're seeing right now in the UK and elsewhere. All right, I see a couple more here. And how do you say abrogation in Arabic? Are you ready for this? Nasikh. And it's called al-nasikh wal-mansukh, which means that which the abrogator and the abrogated. Good luck with it. All right, Coltrane. I'm happy to let the chat know that Saladin never beat Richard. Deus vult. That's true. He didn't. Not only that, it was like a month after Richard left, because he had to deal with King John, that Saladin finally died. And he wasn't even that old. But from all the stress that Richard put him through during the Third Crusade. The Quran has verses that believers are superior when they are faithful and righteous. Could that explain their arrogance? Well, of course. The Quran is essentially an inherently supremacist. Okay, it talks about non-Muslims being cattle, like basically animals, and Muslims are way superior to everyone. And these are actual doctrines. There's these, I don't know if it's a hadith or it could even be in the Quran, but it says the blood of the Muslim is superior to the blood of the non-Muslim. Okay, this comes up all the time. So of course, Islam is inherently completely supremacist. All right, my friends. With that, I will. Thanks for joining me. I hope you found this moderately edifying. I hope. I think it's important. And think about it. And I'll see you again, hopefully soon, maybe later this week. There's so much going on. There's so many topics to discuss. Let me know in the comments what you think, because I used to make videos, but now I find live streams are a little more direct and better. And you know, you can get everything put in, and there's always so much going on. You know, it's hard to focus. Also, if you like this sort of form where I have people that I interview and bring on, let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, and otherwise, thank you for joining me, and bye. Take care.